A really wide-ranging press conference we heard there. What were the major takeaways for you?
Well, first of all, Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, she said at the outset of France's 6 months at the helm of the EU's rotating presidency that she thinks France and Europe go well together. And that statement has really set the tone for, I think, what we saw today. You're right that they covered a wide range of topics, including some of the sort of hot button items, including the climate change policies, including cooperation among EU countries on the pandemic, on vaccination approaches, on the economic recovery. Remember, Macron was one of the leading drivers pushing for the big economic stimulus, a 750 billion euro economic stimulus in the earlier days of the pandemic, which helped a lot of European nations get through this. So there are a lot of items across a wide range that they agree on. And you do get the sense of two leaders who are very much on the same wavelength when it comes to the urgent need for Europe to coordinate more closely on a lot of these issues, not just homegrown European issues, but we heard a lot about the situation vis-a-vis Russia, on Ukraine policy. There were some questions on Kazakhstan, where we right now have a crackdown against what became violent protests in that former Soviet republic. So there are a lot of issues where these two leaders believe that they can and must work together. And they both have stressed the need for what we see as this sort of more powerful Europe. The word that often comes up, Will, is a sovereign Europe. And what they mean by sovereignty is both strategic sovereignty, greater coordinated European defense. But we also heard some nods today on both sides to issues of sort of sovereignty also means cybersecurity. It also means technological security, coordinated policies, digital policies, in order to fend off what's become increasingly a tool of warfare, which is cyber attacks. So on a lot of these issues, they see eye to eye, even if obviously they do not agree on all of the nuances. But what we do know is Ursula von der Leyen has really put her weight behind France's presidency here, seeing Emmanuel Macron as perhaps a particularly ambitious and energetic leader. Some say, especially here in France, too ambitious, given that he also has to be president of France and he's potentially going to be running for re-election as president. He has yet to announce that in a month or two time. So it's a lot that they discussed. They seem to be two leaders who understand each other, who appreciate each other's approaches to Europe, and are willing to essentially try to come together and work more closely over the next 6 months. But there's always a lot of symbolism in these press conferences, but there's a slightly feel-good feeling at this conference. Two leaders who really do see eye to eye on a lot of issues.
Eye to eye in a very pro-European message, as you were saying there, Doug. You also alluded to the upcoming French presidential election. Emmanuel Macron, staunchly pro-European, but that's a little bit of a difficult position for him to hold at the moment now in the country, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I don't know if that was a rhetorical question, Will, but no, listen, the fact of the matter is Ursula von der Leyen, very much. I just talked about her putting her weight behind Emmanuel Macron. You'll remember at the outset of this presidency, Emmanuel Macron placed a giant European Union flag under the Arc de Triomphe on the Champs-Élysées. That provoked an outcry across the political class in France from people who saw that as somehow a snub to France and French patriotism and French values. Ursula von der Leyen, now you could say, as the president of the European Commission, of course she would say this because she is supposed to champion and embrace European values. But she really defended Emmanuel Macron and thought that it was a great initiative and it set just the right tone, showing that the idea of being French president and a French president who's also the head of a rotating EU presidency, these are not incompatible. One is not canceling out the other. Yes, you can have a European Union flag right up there under the Arc de Triomphe. You could still be a French president who's patriotic and proud of France. That's one big issue where they see eye to eye, this sort of intertwining of both France and Europe, and for that matter, any EU member and European values and ideals. So in that respect, Emmanuel Macron, yes, he's up against it at home. He's going to have a lot of people right now making his life, especially his political opponents, life as hard and as difficult as possible as France tries to forge ahead in its agenda on Europe amid a French presidential election. But Emmanuel Macron can and will fire back at his critics that being president of the EU is perhaps not just compatible with being president of France, but doing one the role of one enriches the other. So they are, if you will, symbiotic. And I think we're going to see a lot of those types of arguments made in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, and Doug, real quickly, one last question. So we saw Emmanuel Macron, the head of the French government. We see Ursula von der Leyen, who comes from Germany. These represent the two largest economies in the EU. There's also a question from one of the journalists in attendance about how things would unfold with the third largest economy, Italy. Did we get any clear idea of what relations will look like moving forward?
No, look, we don't. There's simplistic narratives here, right? That Germany and Italy have often been at loggerheads, especially when it comes to budget issues, whether to loosen or tighten the purse strings in austerity. Emmanuel Macron, the Franco-German engine, so much is made of it, and perhaps rightfully so, because for better or for worse, France and Germany have been two drivers of Europe, especially now with Britain out of the European Union, have been two historic drivers of Europe. This triangle doesn't have to be mutually incompatible. What's interesting with Mario Draghi, and you get this sense that Macron and Ursula von der Leyen may be on the same page, is that they all agree on the need perhaps for more investment right now, more pandemic investment in order to help foster and enable Europe's economic recovery after now the pandemic being in its third year here. So even though Germany is often stereotyped as being, extreme stickler when it comes to austerity, not wanting to loosen those purse strings, always cover, not too much debt, and Italy is being seen as this spendthrift, spend. I think that right now there is a common understanding that these three countries, especially in times of pandemic, have more in common perhaps, and can see eye to eye perhaps even better in light of the pandemic than has been the case in the past. So, I saw the Italian question, perhaps trying to get some sort of provocative answer out of Macron, who didn't really want to comment on internal politics. But as European countries go, I think the pandemic, in a way, has brought Germany, France, and Italy closer on a lot of these issues.
All right, Doug, thank you very much. Douglas Herbert, France 24's international affairs commentator.